Hey folks, happy August to you. This is the video that kind of replaces the video we were going to do the other night when I didn't have any Wi-Fi. So got Wi-Fi, we're going to record this video and I'm going to show you some things that I was trying to explain just simply via the phone the other night. And hopefully it kind of ties most of what I was saying together. So hope you are all doing well. Hope that the information that I provide you today will kind of give you a little more insight into where we're going in this long range forecast. It's an important time, obviously, because a lot of us are talking about El Nino and what's going to happen with it. So, bottom line, we need to address what's going to be happening as we go forward. So, let's do that. For right now, the past 30 days look like this. Wet where it's been wet, mainly dry where it's been dry. And you can see it's been dry across most of Texas, into parts of New Mexico, Arizona, right up to the Four Corners area of southeast Utah and southwest Colorado. And again, that's the overall monsoon pattern that has been not only late but diminished that we talked about for a long time. So for the past 30 days, that's kind of what we've been dealing with. The next 45 days forecast looks like this. And in terms of, will the monsoon come on? I do think there are going to be some periods of time here where we see better opportunities for rain in the Southwest with the monsoon. Is it going to be like it was over the past couple of years? No, I don't have a whole lot of faith in that actually returning, but we'll take a little bit of the good with some of the bad that we've had so far, and hopefully we can get a little bit of rain over the next month and a half or so. But bottom line, no huge signals one way or another, except staying dry where it's been dry for the most part across Texas. And even then, I think those folks farther east are going to start to get some help, which is obviously some good news because they have been baking over there. Speaking of baking, get a load of the sea surface temperature anomalies right here. Wherever you're seeing the reds, that's where the sea surface temperature anomalies are in the very positive territory. Where you're seeing the blues, that's where they're in the negative territory or cooler than average. And what I'm noticing here is the El Nino region that I have ovaled still has the warmest water right off the west coast of South America. The farther west you go, it's warmer, yes, but not as warm as farther east. And that is going to be a significant player in the overall forecast trend going forward, as I'll show you here in just a little bit. But in terms of the overall ocean, the only really cool spot that we have right now of consequence is right off the Baja and out toward Hawaii. And even that cooler than average area has been shrinking quite a bit over the past month and a half or so. So, the North Pacific is warm. We've got the ENSO regions are warm, and it's going to be interesting to see how all of this plays out going forward. And I'll give you a little bit of insight into that right now. The Euro seasonal model, the latest version, September, there's your sea surface temperature anomaly forecast. Notice where those darker reds are, again, right off the west coast of South America. So the key to this forecast is, does that real warm water shift farther west? Well, if we look ahead into the November forecast, you can see it does shift a little bit farther west, but it's still about the same story back here off the west coast of South America. So the El Nino really starts to expand and to continue to develop as we head into the fall months, which is very typical of an El Nino, despite the fact that we've been dealing with this now for a while. And even as we head into January, notice that whole ENSO region is fairly warm, but we still have some of the warmer anomalies right off the west coast of South America. So a couple of things that are important about this. One, the El Nino is going to continue to develop, expand, and likely strengthen. And some of that warmer than average water is going to kind of stay put right there off the west coast of South America. Will some of it shift westward? Yes, but the core of it looks to be right off the west coast of South America. And I think in terms of the overall forecast, when I'm saying what type of El Nino are we going to have, that plays a very important role in what the forecast is going to look like. Really quickly, I'm going to give you some intensities here of all of the computer model forecasts. They're over there on the left-hand side, and you can see all of them for September are firmly into El Nino territory, with some of these sea surface temperature anomalies being above, a degree and a half Celsius right there. So what happens after we get past September? Well, there's October, continues to strengthen. Obviously, the mean forecast right there on the bottom line has the ENSO region of consequence, the 3.4 region, which is a little farther west, right there at 2 degrees Celsius above average. That is a significant event. November, we pushed even a little higher, probably up to about 2.1. Just slightly over 2. And then if we look to December, it continues to go up to about 2.2 degrees centigrade. Now, the model that is the strongest with this event is the BOM, or the Bureau of Meteorology. It's the Australian model, and it has been. It's up there almost at 3 degrees Celsius above average. That would be nearing a record event. It has been a little bit too warm so far, so ratcheting things back down a little bit. Even if you do so, you're still talking about a significant El Nino with sea surface temperature anomalies at about 2 to 2.2 degrees Celsius above average in the ENSO region 3.4. So a moderate event, absolutely likely going to be a strong event going forward. So if we look here at the types of events, okay, we've been over this in our recent videos. The traditional, which is the east-based El Nino, that's where the warmer than average water is right there off the west coast of South America. You can see that in the upper left-hand graphic right there. We have a hybrid or an east central base. That's where the warmer than average water shifts a little farther west. And then over here on the right, we have a Modoki or a central based. Right now, the computer model information that we're getting appears to be hinting at a traditional or east-based type of event. So if you come down here to the middle graphic on the left-hand side, that's the upper level weather pattern that prevailed during the east-based or the traditional El Ninos, okay? And you could see the blue and the purple, that's a big old storm generator up in the Gulf of Alaska. The blues and the purples across the southern tier of the United States, that's where the stormiest weather is. And if you go up to the northern part of the country, that's where it's less stormy. And then if you come down here to the lower left, you see all that red across the northern tier. That's where it's warmer than average during the December, January, and February. And then the southern tier is cooler than average or definitely stormier than average. The key to this, though, is the stronger the event, the farther south it pushes that storm track, okay? I've been wanting something more moderate, okay? Because if you have a moderate event, well, then that kind of spreads the wealth out, if you will. And it doesn't lock us into these dire weather regimes where if you're really dry, you stay really dry. And if you're really wet, you stay really wet. So right now, a moderate to strong traditional east-based El Nino, I think, is the most likely scenario at this time. That doesn't mean that it can't change, but at this time, I think that's what we're looking at. Here are the stronger east-based and also all of the other types of El Ninos lumped together, okay, from September through April. So from September of this year would be through April of next year. These are looking at some of the analogs. And it's about what you would expect, okay? It's got the southern half of the country wetter than average. These precipitation anomalies, green and blue is wetter than average, yellow and red, drier than average. So the farther north you go, stands good reason during an El Nino that you're drier than average. Even up into the Ohio Valley and parts of the Northeast, you have problems. The lock, stock, and barrel of this is that usually East Texas and right along the Gulf Coast and in the Southeast, the strongest signals across the board for the wettest conditions are usually there and then back across parts of California. Now, if we switch that and just look at the strong events in the East-based or traditional, this is what we get, okay? That includes 1951, 52, 57, 58, 72, 73, 82, 83, and 97, 98. So again, where you're seeing those darker blues, that's where the wet signal is really prominent. Again, most of California and parts of the Southwest and also across the Southeastern United States, all right? There's a lot of wealth that's spread around in between, but as I said, for the East-based and the traditional El Ninos of consequence right there, those years that are mentioned, this is what averaged out to be the case, okay? Still some wiggle room. These analogs are early. There'll be some things that'll changing, but I know you're interested in it, so that's what I wanted to get. You might ask yourself, well, why did you go only until April? Usually because the El Nino signal weakens quite a bit thereafter. All right, so I see this event lasting at least through the winter and probably into early spring. So I wanted to put the brakes on there as far as April is concerned. This is the latest Euro seasonal model, the precipitation forecast for September. Brown is drier than average. The greens and the blues wetter than average, and you can see that parts of the Southwest are still dealing with some drier than average conditions. A little bit better across parts of New Mexico, West Texas, but really the meat of the wet weather is confined to the northern areas and on up into the upper Midwest. Now, if we look at October, it's kind of the same flavor, really. And with October, sometimes these El Ninos can be a lot warmer than average and drier than average, at least initially in the fall, before we really start to see that seasonal change take place. So if this were to happen, it wouldn't surprise me at all. But I do think that shortly thereafter, we're going to start to get with it. So probably later in October, November, certainly you can see the middle part of the country light up. With wetter than average conditions, you can see parts of the Southwest start to light up there in the month of November with wetter than average conditions. In December, you see where it starts to dry out there a little bit. The Pacific Northwest, parts of the Northern Rockies, parts of Southern Nevada, California, Arizona, right across the southern tier and into the eastern part of the country. The model is suggesting wetter than average conditions for the month of December. If we look at January, California starts to show up right there. Eastern New Mexico, Texas, right along the Gulf Coast in the southeast. It's a very classical signal in terms of El Nino with this particular model that continues into the month of February. I mean, look what February is showing. California is wet, southern Nevada, right down through Arizona, New Mexico, even the front range of Colorado, southeast Wyoming, the middle part of the country is wetter than average during the month of February. And so this would basically mean December would be drier than average for California. January, February, we'd start to turn things on a little bit in terms of that. If you're looking at Utah specifically, there's some dry signal there, but not a stout dry signal. Okay, something that would be more variable with this. But this is a testament to what I was talking about before. The stronger the event, the farther south it pushes that storm track, especially from late fall through the course of the winter months. So I think that that's something that we definitely are going to have to pay attention to see if how that really comes to fruition. The NMME model, this is also hot off the presses for September. It still has the dry signal through the southwest, obviously owing to the diminished monsoon pattern. We start to light things up on the southeast. Let's go to October. Still a little bit of that residual dry signal in parts of the southwest, but you can see a more prominent dry signal in the Pacific Northwest. That's more typical with an El Nino episode. No one particular area is really wetter than average during October, but in November, you see southeast Texas, the Gulf Coast start to light up, and we're still waiting for things to kind of materialize there in the west and the southwest, at least through the month of November. Okay, but at least that prominent dry signal is not locked in the southwest anymore. It's shifted a little bit more to the Pacific Northwest, which again, as I said, is more typical. December, Pacific Northwest drier than average. California starts to turn on right there. A lot of white across the mountain communities that is tending toward average snowfall during that time. The southeast is soaked, which again is very average during a traditional or an east-based El Nino. We go to January, California lights up, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico. The south and the southeast is still pretty wet during that time. The Pacific Northwest on up through British Columbia is obviously drier than average by quite a bit. And then if we look into February, you still have the same dry signal in the Pacific Northwest. Farther south and southeast, a lot lesser. And then you have something showing up here in the Corn Belt and the Ohio Valley, which again is somewhat typical for an east-based or a traditional El Nino. So if I had to kind of sum this up a little bit, I'd say the NMME is lagging a little bit in what the traditional pattern would show up as, and the Euro model probably has a better feel on what that traditional pattern is going to show. At least that's my gut instinct right now, based on what the model is doing as far as those sea surface temperature anomalies go. This last one I want to show you is a little bit wonky. This is the IRI multi-model ensemble. And this is September, October, November. It still has a dry signal across the southwest part of the country, which some of that may be in September with the lack of the monsoon. But the interesting thing about this is that if we go to the next one and go November, December, January, it has Arizona, New Mexico, and a lot of Mexico drier than average. Which would really buck the trend, especially when you have the southeast that's wetter than average right there. So that one was kind of a head scratcher to me as to why Arizona, New Mexico would have that dry signal when literally no other place around it has. And if you've got a southern storm track coming through California, why would it stop there in Arizona, New Mexico? That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So I wanted to show that to you just to kind of put that in your brain, but I'm not putting a whole lot of stock into that at this time. So in summary, El Nino continues to develop, and the warmest water is still east-based, okay? It's out there right off the west coast of South America, as we talked about. Confidence is continuing to grow that this could be a traditional or east-based El Nino event. It's still early, but modeling and oceanic trends are kind of pointing in that direction, as I've discussed. And I had those first guess analogs in there for you too, at least as a peek as to kind of what the usual weather is associated with this type of El Nino. The PDO is still negative, but I still expect that to kind of moderate a little bit going forward as the overall ocean basin warms. I don't think that we'll see a full-on phase shift at this time. That may change if we can really warm things up, but I'm being a little bit more conservative on that at this time. And I think, as I said over the phone the other night, we have to be mindful that we shouldn't put all of our eggs in the El Nino basket. Every event is different and can produce some unexpected impacts. So if we lose that El Nino signal in the spring, which we traditionally do, what may be a very wet beginning of the year in 2024 may taper off. So we have to at least be prepared for that. Just because that El Nino starts out in the winter and spring, it's probably not going to carry us over through the remainder of 2024. So I think we have to be mindful of that. And lastly, how long the event will last is still in question. At least a moderate to strong event through the winter, though, and probably early spring seems likely at this point. So that's just kind of a quick summary of what I was talking about right there. If you have any questions, concerns, obviously, there's my cell phone number, there's my email. If you want to get in touch with Ross or Sean or Steve or whoever, they can obviously relay that information to me as well. But this is kind of what we're thinking for right now. Obviously, we have some big months coming up, and I welcome your interaction as we have the webinars going forward in the future. And as I said, if you have any questions about this, please don't hesitate to ask. You don't see you until then. I will see you in September. Be good.